Good morning. By Friday, at the latest, the United Kingdom will have another new Prime Minister.
I am resigning as leader of the Conservative Party.
The Tories in turmoil again.
The damage they have done to our party is extraordinary.
The party hunts for a new leader again.
It will be possible to conclude a leadership election by Friday the 28th.
The rest of us waiting for a new Prime Minister again.
Mr. Speaker.
After weeks of chaos. How many people voted for your plan?
What do you mean by that?
The Prime Minister is not under a desk, as the Honourable Lady.
Liz Truss secured her place in history for all the wrong reasons.
The shortest serving Prime Minister in British history.
But what are the rest of us to make of it?
We need a general election now.
There must be a general election.
We need another general election.
What the cockeyed hell is going on?
He'll be running. She is running. And he's come back from the Caribbean claiming he has the backing to have a go. We have one big question this morning. Can any of them get a grip? This morning we're joined live in the studio by one of the three contenders, Penny Mordaunt. And the man leading the call for a general election now, Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer. And a man who's been on a journey from Deputy Prime Minister to Boris Johnson to now supporting Rishi Sunak, Dominic Raab. And Jacob Rees-Mogg, you can see there, who is a Boris Johnson evangelist. And away from British politics, I've been talking to Ukraine's Defence Minister, Alexei Reznikov. And with me at the news desk for the whole hour, listening to all of the pitches this morning, is the former Governor of the Bank of England, Lord Mervyn King, Professor Jane Green from Oxford University, who will be talking to us about the latest polling, and the former Conservative Party leader, Sir Iain Duncan Smith. A very good morning and a warm welcome to you if you're watching here at home or away on BBC World. And extra points if you emailed us after last week's show. You can do that anytime at kuenssberg@bbc.co.uk. We do read them all and we'll use some of them on the programme. And if you're social media inclined, you can use the hashtag #BBCLauraK. So let's crack on. We are, again, waiting for the Conservative Party to make up its mind about its leader and all of our Prime Minister. I'm told Rishi Sunak will announce officially later today, and he and Boris Johnson did meet face-to-face last night for what's been described to me as a friendly discussion. But contrary to some suggestions, it didn't go on for hours and hours until extremely late, but there is no sniff of what was agreed or not. Now, Iain Duncan Smith, former leader yourself, you're a significant voice in the Conservative Party. Have you made up your mind?
No.
Why not? You know all of these people very well.
I've been involved now in so many leadership campaigns, including my own, by the way, and run some. I've reached a stage with this one, really. I desperately want my party to settle down. In a way, it's not really just about leadership, it's also about the wider party. Internally, in the moment, in the Conservative Party, I just question whether any leader is going to be supported in quite the way they should be. And that's one of the problems you have when you've been in power for 12 years, is that everybody starts thinking that they alone can save themselves in their seats because they're somehow different and they're going to be this, that or the other thing. The problem is, right now, we have to decide whether or not we're going to make a go of this last 2 years in the run to the government, to the election, or not. And therefore, if we're going to pick somebody now, we have to pick somebody that we will get behind. And that's it. We have a big challenge, huge economic issues, big issues around war in Europe, real problems after a result of the lockdown, which are damaging every country in the developed world.
Well, maybe you'll make up your mind here on the programme this morning. Let's just take a look at the front pages, which, no surprise, splashed on many of them are images of Boris Johnson coming back into the country, claiming that he has the support to run. You can see the Sunday Express there saying Boris is back. Others taking a very different view. The Observer saying top Tories say Johnson return would risk the party's death. Interestingly, on the Telegraph and in some of the other papers, calls for the two men to unite. But Jane, looking at the polling, I mean, how much damage has the last month or so done?
Oh, it's extraordinary. It's absolutely extraordinary. If you look at the polls, you see the Labour Party around 30% ahead, which is it's really huge. I mean, this is really, really significant. And of course, Liz Truss's own personal ratings were historically low. And meanwhile, the real concern to the public is the economy. I mean, it's all of these other public, sector issues. And so, not a leadership campaign.
Have you ever seen anything like it, that level of drop in support?
So I think I haven't seen anything quite like that. I think, but we can look back at different historic events and think about the big moments that shape politics. These kind of, like Black Wednesday, we often cite that because it was so important for the Conservative brand. It was such an important moment that made many people question the Conservatives' economic competence, and it has so many resonances with that particular moment.
And a really profound moment then politically, but economically, Lord King. I mean, does it seem to you as if the markets are the ones who've been in charge? Because it seems to a lot of people, they basically bullied Liz Truss out of office.
Markets are not in charge. Governments and central banks are. Markets respond to the announcements made by governments and central banks. And central banks have lost control of inflation. Governments lost control of the public finance. Not surprising that markets respond to that.
And whose responsibility was it then, if both the central bank and the government lost control?
Well, I think all central banks in the West, interestingly, made the same mistake. And during COVID, when the economy was actually contracting because of lockdown, central banks decided it was a good time to print a lot of money. That was a mistake. That led to inflation. We had too much money chasing too few goods, and the result was inflation. That was predictable, it was predicted, and it happened. So that's one problem we have to try and get out of. But the public finances, both in the United States and in the United Kingdom, were not put on a sustainable track, and markets responded to that.
OK, well, we'll dig into more of that. Fascinating to hear you have those remarks about the Bank of England and what they've been up to. Now, in a second, we'll hear from one of the trio who wants the top job. But remember, this time last week, we didn't even know there'd be a leadership contest up and running. The Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, told us there were hard times ahead, but we didn't know just how difficult they'd be for the woman then in Downing Street. On Monday, there he is, Mr Hunt ditched even more of Liz Truss's plans from his new desk in the Treasury. That night, though, under the glare of a portrait of her heroine Margaret Thatcher in Number 10, Liz Truss said she wasn't going anywhere.
Will you lead the Conservatives into the next general election?
I will lead the Conservatives into the next general election.
Definitely.
Well, look, yeah.
But she was still under attack the next day at Prime Minister's questions. Ms Truss again said she wouldn't budge.
Mr Speaker, I am a fighter and not a quitter.
That afternoon, her Home Secretary was sacked. Then a vote in the Commons turned into chaos that night, with claims that MPs were nearly brawling in the lobbies. Number 10 desperately tried to clarify what went on at 1:30 in the morning. So with no plan that bore her name left and chaos and no authority to speak of, the Tory party decided it was time to bring the misery to an end. Yes, the Conservatives concluded it was time for yet another Prime Minister. So, with one out, who of the three will be in? Right now, the latest confirmed numbers are as followed. Rishi Sunak, you can see there, way in front with nominations from 129 MPs. Boris Johnson there with 53. And here with me now, Penny Mordaunt, who has 23 MPs behind her. Thank you so much for coming in. I know it's a really busy time for you.
Morning.
At the Conservative conference this year, you said that Liz Truss's policies were great. Do you still think that?
I think that she was right that we needed to focus on growth. But as you remember from the contest we had in the summer, I was more cautious about how we did that. I felt we had to be really focusing on supply side changes. And I set out some principles on which we should be taking decisions. I wanted us to be tax competitive. But despite pressure from my colleagues, I would not commit to numbers or a particular timetable. Why? Because I was very aware of the dangers of doing that.
But you are part of Liz Truss's government and you agreed, therefore, to those policies. Unless, did you raise private concerns about what might happen once you were in there?
Well, I very much regret the mini-budget as it's become known. Liz Truss said that there were certain aspects of that which the Cabinet was not aware of, but what is absolutely critical is that we now have stability and we rebuild confidence.
But it's an important point.
That is absolutely vital.
But it is an important point, Penny Mordaunt, because our viewers, many of them believe they're already suffering because of the costs and the consequences of Liz Truss's decisions. I think people will want to know, did you raise concerns when you were in the government and part of those decisions?
I have raised concerns even before I've got into the cabinet, Laura, and that is why I ran on the platform I did in the summer. I was the halfway house between Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss, and I deeply regret that the debate now is about, are you for stability or low taxes? That's not the right construct. They're two sides of the same coin. You have to have stability in order to deliver low tax, and you have to have low taxes in order to grow the economy and create that stability. That is what I am standing for. That is why I think I'm best placed to unite our party.
So to be really clear, you've said you would keep Jeremy Hunt on as Chancellor. He has said that there's going to have to be tax rises and plans to cut spending. Where would you cut if you become Prime Minister?
So the reason why I have been into the Treasury, been through his plans with him, with Jeremy Hunt.
Oh, you've sat and talked through the plans
with
Jeremy
Hunt?
Hunt?
I have. Yes, I've sat in the Treasury and I've been briefed by him. And I think it's helpful to set out to your viewers what is going to happen, because obviously at the end of this coming week, we will have the leadership contest done. We will have a new Prime Minister. And then the following Monday, the Chancellor delivers his statement. I think it is incredibly important that timetable stays. I am the candidate that has said Hunt must stay as Chancellor, because that smooth transition of power and that continuity is absolutely vital. What I'm not going to do, Laura, although I sense you're going to try very hard during this campaign, is I'm not going to talk about the details of that package, what might come forward, or decisions that are in the Bank of England's remit. That would be wrong. We've just got to put the country first here.
But to be completely clear, though, a Penny Mordaunt Prime Minister would, alongside a Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, mean tax rises and spending cuts.
I'm not going to be drawn on this.
Well, that's what he said. That's what he told us on this programme last week.
What is important, yes, but he's made a statement into the Commons, and I'm not going to elaborate on that. What is important is that we recognise that we're going into a very difficult winter. We recognise that people are going to need to be protected and supported through that. And that's why we've got to really double down on the supply side changes, and we've just got to be realistic about what it is we're going to need to do.
And
over
I think
the winter.
people do want to hear you be realistic about what your priorities would be. So I understand that you don't want to get into micro detail, but I think that our viewers would like an indication of what your priorities would be. So I am going to ask you to try and give us some brief answers on things that you may or may not do. Would you make cuts to the health service?
Well, what might be helpful, Laura, is to remind you of the platform I stood on in the summer. That might be a way of satisfying your question, but not talking about the current circumstances. As I said, I was that halfway house. I very much recognised that people needed support. I suggested ways we can do that, things that would not exacerbate inflation, targeted and measured tax cuts. I also very much recognised that we were going to have to protect services, and actually that is what Jeremy Hunt is looking to do.
So let's press on that then. So in principle, would you make cuts to the health service, yes or no?
That we have to recognise that we have enormous backlogs.
So
we are going to at any time in the last 12 years has a Conservative government rolled back on health spending.
So you wouldn't make cuts to the health service?
What we have to do is we have to make efficiency savings. But what we have to do is ensure that those services that people need, and we're still recovering from the pandemic, are there. I'm not going to be drawn into the detail of this, but what is important for your viewers is to understand that I recognise that people are going to need support, that our health service is under immense strain.
And what about defence spending? Would you increase defence spending to 3% of GDP? I know defence is close to your heart.
If people don't know my views on the necessary reason why we have strong defence, then they
that's why
haven't
I'm asking
been
you.
paying
But does
attention.
that mean an increase of 3% of GDP?
I know that me not giving you an answer to that question is to my detriment, but I'm putting the country first. We have got to have stability, and we can't have people in this contest, I know it's only a week, mercifully, making spending commitments. We must stick to that process.
What about, though, sticking to the triple lock? That's something that protects pensioners' incomes. That's been a totemic thing for the Conservative Party. Would you stick to that?
I'm really proud we brought that in. We recognise that people are going to, the older they get, the higher their cost of living. It is something that the Conservatives have done. I'm very proud of our record in government.
So would you stick to it because it was in the manifesto?
If we Conservatives remember our record since 2010 when we took over, when there was no money left, what we've done on pensioner income, how many people we've brought into work, 4 million
because
people.
that was in the manifesto. So
I'm
do you
not
stand by
being
it?
drawn on that,
So
Laura.
you might,
But what I would say, because I understand people want reassurance, and I want our party to remember this week what we all have in common, the achievements we have made together, the manifesto that we stood on together, because that's our mandate. It's the 2019
And one final one, and this is a
manifesto.
yes or no on this, please. During the conference, you said that benefits should rise in line with inflation. Yes or no? Do you stand by that? You said it a couple of weeks ago.
I'm not. You're trying very hard, Laura,
Well, you
to
said
draw
it yourself
me on
a couple of
these.
weeks ago.
People know my record. They know the record of this Conservative government. We have always protected people, but I'm not being drawn into the detail. This is really
But you said
important.
it a couple of weeks ago, Penny Mordaunt.
What we must do is remember that our mandate lies in the 2019 manifesto. If we remember what we all wanted to do at that last election, our ambitions for the country to deliver on those wishes that people set out in 2016, that will help unite us. That's our job.
And one of those ambitions, one of the Conservatives' ambitions would be to get immigration under 100,000. Do you share that ambition still?
Again, I'm not being drawn on the detail.
But that's a question
one
of
the
principle.
differences.
But that's
one
a
of the
question of
differences.
principle. That's not about spending decisions. That's a question of principle. Some people in your party are pro-immigration. They think it'll help grow the economy. Other people in the Conservative Party stand by what was a promise made over many years to get immigration under 100,000. That's nothing to do with the intricate decisions in the budget coming up.
I believe in evidence-based policy making. I also believe in cabinet collective responsibility. And one of the differences you'll see if I am Prime Minister is that is how I will take decisions. I won't be imposing, I have my views, but I won't be imposing policy that I've just made up in a room by myself.
Okay, well, that's not policy being made up. That's something that's been a long-standing Conservative promise.
With my cabinet.
Okay, well, let's talk about how that might work. As the numbers stand, it doesn't look like you are going to get to the final two in the contest.
I will correct you on that. I will remind you, Laura.
Well, I was going to ask you, do you think you could still make it?
In the last contest, I got 105, and you'll see from those that have put their names in the public domain, we're taking support from other camps. Damon Green has rejoined my campaign from Rishi. We've got Marcus Fish, who is from the other side of the party and has joined my campaign.
But you're currently on 23, according to our numbers. Do you think you can make it to the 100?
I'm a savvy campaigner, Laura. I'm not sharing my canvassing data with the others. I am very confident about the progress we are making, and I will say to you that I am in this to win it. I think it's important for our party. We have a contest. I am very confident about our numbers. And the reason why I am doing this is because I think I am best placed to bring the party together. We have got to come together. We can't deliver for people. People are fed up of the factional rows, the focus on ourselves. We have got to remember why we came into this place in the first place. It was to serve our constituents and our communities.
There is a report, though, this morning that you have been in touch with Boris Johnson's camp, potentially offering your support in return for a job.
No,
do you deny?
It's completely false.
How would you, though, approach a Boris Johnson or Rishi Sunak prime ministership? I mean, you've said you are confident you will make the numbers, but in your view, I think people will be interested. Who would make a better prime minister, Rishi Sunak or Boris Johnson?
I'm standing to be prime minister. I am not contemplating how the other camps are organising themselves. I'm focused on what this country needs. And what this country needs is a prime minister that understands their lives. I wasn't given my seat. I took it. I fought it for 7 years and took it from Labour. And every time I have been to the ballot box since, I've increased my vote share. That is because I work hard, I listen to people, I know why I'm in politics, but it's also because I know that it's no point in any politician telling the electorate how much they understand them. You only win elections when those people feel understood.
And I know you are.
And that's why we need to stop focusing on ourselves in Westminster and start focusing on them.
And I know you are passionate about why you came into politics. And as you say, you fought hard to get your seat and have fought hard to keep your seat and your vote share growing. Given how strongly you feel about that concept of public service, would you be comfortable about Boris Johnson returning to office when he left in disgrace?
It's not about him. It's not about me. It's about the public. We have got to, I mean, we coined the phrase the Westminster bubble. It is. It's not about us. It's about what we do. It's about people being able to see a GP. It's about people being able to get through winter without being worried about how they're going to keep the heating and the lights on.
And some people are very unhappy, as you know yourself from the polls. I'm sure you've had it in your mailbox. And I think some of our viewers are too. One of them, Keith, has emailed us asking this question. He said the Conservatives may have the constitutional right to avoid an election, but they don't have the democratic or moral legitimacy to avoid it. How do you answer that?
At the 2019 election, we had a huge majority and a mandate to deliver that manifesto. The country now doesn't need 6 weeks of chaos and more Westminster bubble. What it needs is us to deliver. Open up access to healthcare services, all those bread and butter issues that people just want things to work better. That's what we have to do. That's our mandate. And I also think it's incredibly important that we remember that as a party, that we come together and we actually start to work on that.
OK, Penny Mordaunt, we must leave it there. But thank you so much for coming in. It's going to be a fascinating 24 hours. I'll let you go now and probably get back on the phones. Thank you so much.
Laura.
And we will keep keeping an eye on the numbers of MPs all the way to the end of the show. And if you want to get in touch about what you've seen this morning or have an idea of something we should discuss, you can send us an email. The address is there for you. Or if you're social media inclined, the hashtag is there and the BBC website live page is up and running with lots of news and interesting features on bbc.co.uk/news. Let's hear what our panel made of that. Iain, you were undecided at the start. Penny convinced you?
Well, I'm not going to declare during the course of this programme, but what we saw there was the same problem that every one of these three candidates is going to face. First of all, it's a Conservative Party that can't make its mind up at the moment whether it wants to see savings through public expenditure or whether it wants to see higher taxes. And the trouble with the more you pile on the higher taxes, the less business investment you're going to get and the more short-term that process is. So there are big decisions to be made. I suspect any one of the three candidates is going to have to arrive at almost exactly the same conclusion.
Interesting.
We cannot get away from the fact we are going to have to see efficiency savings in public expenditure. But there are other things to do as well, like the deregulation process, which we need to do to improve the efficiency and productivity of the British economy. Those are the big important things.
But what about the concept, though, of Boris Johnson coming back to office? I mean, for understandable reasons, Penny Mordaunt didn't want to get into it. But how did you feel about that? I mean, you were a Boris Johnson backer for a long time. Could you thaw the prospect of him coming back after everything that's happened?
It's peculiar. When somebody said we're in peculiar times, they really underestimated exactly how peculiar these are. I mean, Boris only left a few months ago, and now he's talking about being back. There are pros and cons with each of the candidates. The pros for Boris are very clearly that he cuts through to the public and he's a phenomenal campaigner. The downsides of it are he's going to face this inquiry right now, which would make it very...
Privileges Committee looking into whether he misled
And the problem is going to be how many of his colleagues are going to decide they won't support him if it gets to a difficult position. And then finally, of course, there's the administration of government, which are issues as whether or not Boris will focus hard on administration. On the Rishi front, quite simply, you've got somebody that's demonstrated he's strong on administration, but the jury's out as whether or not he's a great campaigner. So what you get with this group of people is different facets of things that will help, but whether or not you can bring them all together. Personally, I'd love them all to go and sit in a room somewhere and decide whether or not they could just make a government.
Well, it's interesting. We can show you some of the newspaper editorials actually suggesting that. I think we can show you the Mail on Sunday and also the Sun on Sunday editorials. Now, of course, both of them were big Boris Johnson fans, but actually they're stopping short of backing him. They're saying, get together, knock your heads together, sort it out. And I know also Iain, Duncan Smith's got his own editorial in the Express this morning calling for unity, which is going to be an enormous task for whoever ends up with the crown. But Jane, as a pollster, when you look at the numbers and you see the different candidates in action, does one of them stand out as being able to get the public back on side more than the others?
It's totally unclear. I mean, what we know about Boris Johnson is everything the public already made in terms of assessment. So we know that he's a very polarising character. We know that he didn't have very, very high popularity, certainly compared to Theresa May. But he was popular amongst Leave voters. He was popular amongst especially those voters who had toyed with voting for the Brexit Party.
But that's interesting, because when you talk to Boris Johnson backers, there's often this, they talk about his immense popularity, but you're suggesting really that's a bit of a myth.
Well, we have to kind of understand that he had popularity amongst a certain segment of the public, and then, we won't spend the hours it would take to talk about the 2019 result and what was behind all of that. But, what was absolutely crucial there was that the Leave vote united behind the Conservatives, and they united behind Boris Johnson. Now, what we also know about Boris Johnson is that the public started to turn against him, and that included Leave voters. It included those voters who had gone to the Conservative Party for the first time in 2019. Not all of them, but on average, there were more Leave voters voting Tory in 2019, so there were more moving away from the Conservative Party under him.
So there's a lot of commentary in the newspapers, and we can show you a piece by Camilla Long, one of the Sunday Times columnists, who talks actually about the public being in a sort of unhealthy relationship with Boris Johnson. They sort of love him but hate him but can't ignore him. Lord King, what does this political turmoil do for the economy? I mean, you've talked about government and Bank of England mistakes, but what impact does turmoil have?
I don't think it has a lasting impact. I think both government, whoever the Prime Minister is, and indeed the opposition, need to confront three challenges to our economy. One is high inflation, 10% at present. That can be solved really only by having slow growth over the next couple of years to bring inflation down. Second, we're bequeathing to our children and grandchildren a massive amount of national debt. What are we doing to try to improve the performance of the economy 10, 20 years down the road? I think Liz Truss was right to focus on the need to do that. Where she was wrong was in believing this could happen in 2 years, whereas it will take much longer. And the third is that as a country, we're saving far too little. We don't invest very much, but we don't save even the amount that we're investing, and we have a big external deficit.
Do you mean us as individuals?
No, as a nation, as a nation. And the big challenge, I think, is that the best way to improve national savings is to reduce the size of the government budget deficit. And that's a major challenge for both parties, because you heard from Penny Mordaunt, we will probably hear in a minute from Keir Starmer, that public expenditure isn't going down. If anything, it will go up. Therefore, taxes will have to rise to fill the gap which is there at present. That doesn't make a very happy picture for the next few years. But what we need is a government that will actually tell us honestly there is a reduction in our national standard of living because we've decided to help Ukraine and confront Russia. And that means that all of us are going to have to share the burden. We can't just put all of it on our children and grandchildren.
And what does that mean as well for the things that people see coming out of their bank account every month? Mortgages, rents, high for a long time?
Well, mortgage rates are clearly going to go up. Now, we're not alone in that. If you look at longer term interest rates, which are reflected in fixed rate mortgage rates, US interest rates have been rising at least as fast, if not faster, than those in this country. And that's been true right since the beginning of the year. So now we've both been very much in the same boat.
Do you think your successor at the Bank of England left it too late to start cracking down on this?
I think all central banks made the mistake during the lockdown period of thinking that they should print a lot of money to support the economy, whereas in fact, with the economy contracting under lockdown, that was the wrong policy. And all central banks, not just ours, but the Federal Reserve, the European Central Bank, are all facing now very high inflation rates of close to 10%. We're all in the same boat.
But you are saying, you're trying to say diplomatically about your successor, but you're pretty clear the Bank of England was too slow.
Well, all central banks were slow, and actually, if I was to blame anyone, I'd blame the economics profession for encouraging them to believe that they could just print money and it didn't matter.
That's interesting. So the whole shebang, the whole thing has been wrong, including if you look back now to what happened when you were trying to help us climb out of the last financial crisis. Was it a mistake?
No, because then engaging in quantitative easing in 2009 was to stop the economy from going into another recession, because the amount of money in the economy was going down. Here, in the last couple of years, the amount of money in the economy has grown very rapidly and at a pace that was bound to lead to higher inflation.
So what would you say then to politicians? Time to front up, to be truthful?
Yeah, I think it's time to front up, to have a narrative that explains to people the consequence of A, allowing inflation to pick up, B, confronting Russia and supporting Ukraine, which has reduced our national standard of living, and C, the need to help future generations cope with the increased national debt that we are leaving to them.
And just for context, do you think this will feel to the public, to our viewers, with all the impacts on public spending, people feeling hardship for a long time? Will this feel like the era of austerity again, in between the period when you were in charge and George Osborne was making cuts?
Well, in some ways it could be more difficult. I think everyone can see there is a strong case for higher public spending in certain areas as we recover from the lockdown period. And in many ways, people are very good at identifying areas where public spending should be higher in the longer term.
Well, everybody wants more public spending for the things they care about.
Well, the challenge is, if we want European levels of welfare payments and public spending, you cannot finance that with American levels of tax rates. So we may need to confront the need to have, significantly higher taxes on the average person. There isn't enough money there amongst the rich
well, you
to get it
mentioned
back.
What's going on in other countries there. I just want to have a quick look and show you how other countries have been watching what's been happening in this country in the last week or so.
We're following some breaking news out of the United Kingdom after less than 2 months on the job.
Her speedy exit was noticed across the pond. How bad it got and how blue the air, reported in Germany too.
Furious, and I don't care anymore.
The old friend and rival highlighted the need for calm across the channel.
I hope in any case the UK can again find stability. That's good for us and good for Europe.
On the unlikely breakout star, yes, a lettuce, not Liz Truss. Britain in the headlines around the world this week. Iain, Duncan Smith, I don't want to make light of any of this, but can you actually believe what you've seen in the last 7 days from your party?
No, internally in the party, it's we've turned in on ourselves, and that's always a big mistake and a problem, because there are big problems to face, and I know you're going to discuss those in a second. It's also worth reminding ourselves, as Lord King said earlier on, if you take a pace back and have a look at what's going on in many of those countries where they were talking about our problems, China's hitting the buffers on their economy, their currencies come under attack. Japan's got a 35-year low on their currency now. Germany, high inflation, and Italy and Sweden have turned to populists.
But they're also laughing at us, though. I mean, as a Conservative, do you feel embarrassed?
Well, I do. I don't want anyone to laugh at us. All I'm saying is that Mervyn is right. The problem is a global failure of both politics and central banking and the institutions, and now we're going to have to pick those pieces up. And the lockdown and the war have created a bow wave of problems for us, which is no way of escaping. And that's causing problems everywhere. Internally to my party, there are big questions to be asked, obviously, of what a Labour government would do. All of these things are inescapable, and that's what we're going to have to confront.
OK, all three of you, thank you very much indeed for now. Mervyn, I know that you coined the phrase that every central banker is a silver lining attached to a cloud, but it's been fascinating to hear your insights so far this morning. Now, while the Tory camps do battle, the opposition parties watch on. There is no question that Labour has profited in the polls from the Tories' misery. It is only 3 weeks since we talked to Keir Starmer at the Labour Party conference, but so much has changed in that time. He is back. Thank you for coming to the studio this morning. Nice to see you. Nice to welcome you to our studio rather than at your conference. Huge turmoil, 3 possible contenders for Prime Minister. Who would you prefer to face?
Well, Laura, forgive me if I don't spend too much of my time in this interview on the ridiculous, chaotic circus that is going on at the top of the Tory party, because my focus is on the millions of people who are struggling to pay their bills, have now got additional anxieties about their mortgage. I know what it feels like not to be able to pay their bills. That happened to me and my family when I was growing up. They are fed up to the back teeth with this. And there is an alternative. We could have a stable Labour government which, on day one, would restore faith in the institutions that give us market stability, would introduce a windfall tax so that the energy price fees is not paid for by working people and taxpayers, but oil and gas companies who've made excess profits pay their fair share, and we would have a plan for growth to get our country going.
But it does make a difference.
But Laura, hear me out, because these people are so fed up. They're entitled. They want a say in this. There is a choice to be made. We need a general election. Let the public in to decide. Do they want to continue with this utter chaos, or do they want stability under a Labour government?
But you know very well you can't make that election happen. It is up to the governing party to decide when it happens. It's not going to happen.
And they've got a choice to make, Laura, because they can either put their party first or their country first. The country needs change. The country needs stability. The country needs to get rid of this chaos. It's been going on for the best part of 12 years. We don't need another change at the top of the Tory party. We need a change of government. But every opposition leader I can ever remember calls for a general election. The fact is, it's not in your gift to make it happen. Well, no, of course, it's up to Tory MPs to decide. But what I said to my party at our conference was very, very clear. We will always put the country first and party second. The Tories are putting their party first again. That's what's got us into this problem. They cannot be the solution to a problem that they have created.
Well, of course, all the candidates who are interested in running would say that they're the people who could turn it around. But last time we met, you said that Labour was starting to believe it could win. You said you could sense that. But at PMQs this week, just 3 weeks later, you called yourself a government in waiting. Now, that is, as we've heard from Jane Green this morning, that's largely due to a Tory collapse. Perhaps not much you've done. Are you getting a bit complacent?
Well, Laura, I reject that. As you know, if you're in opposition, it's very hard to get seen and heard, and the beam of the lighthouse only comes round so often onto the opposition. It came on to us in our conference. You were there. We discussed it. It came onto the Labour Party, illuminated us. And what I think everybody saw was a Labour Party that has changed, a Labour Party that is putting forward the answers to the challenges we face as a country, and a Labour Party that has the confidence to govern. Now, I'm not complacent, and I've already said to my shadow cabinet that complacency is the enemy. We have to fight for every single vote. But at the moment, if you think of all those millions of people who are fed up, people who are going into this winter worrying about their bills, now they've got mortgage payments that are higher than they otherwise would be, as a direct result of the Tories crashing the economy.
Well,
if they're our focus, then they're entitled. They want to say this. They shouldn't be shut out.
Let's talk about what you might do if somehow you get your general election and you go on to win it. We've just heard Lord King say there clearly and powerfully that essentially we've all been living in a bit of a fantasy land. He said that public expenditure is going to go up, taxes are going to go up, not just for the richest, but for everyone. Do you accept that?
Well, look, Laura, the damage has been done to our economy, and an incoming government is going to have to pick up a real mess of our economy, of the Tories' making. Now, at the moment, we don't know the full extent of the damage because we haven't had an OBR report. We need that.
You have heard the former Bank of England governor say that to be realistic and to be truthful with the public. That's what he was saying, to be truthful with the public. You've got to be saying that taxes will have to go up if we want to enjoy the kinds of standards that we get right now.
Laura, we need that OBR report so we know the extent of the damage. We need that, whoever comes in as Prime Minister, we need that OBR report because we all need to see the extent of the damage. What I've said from a Labour Party point of view is I know there are going to be tough choices. I said that actually in April 3 weeks ago. I said it last week again. Tough choices that mean we can't do some of the things that we want to do as an incoming Labour government as quickly as we would want to. Well, I'm not going to write our manifesto on the programme, Laura, but I am being clear that we will be the party of sound money. We know there are tough choices to be made. We have already set out, Laura, some of the things we would do. A windfall tax on oil and gas companies would bring in tens of billions of pounds.
And you've mentioned that.
Non-dom state tax status change, the private equity
you've mentioned
fund
that,
loopholes.
and there is a dispute as well about how much that would raise. But I want to pick up on something you just said there, which is something you said earlier last week, and actually we discussed it with one of your colleagues last week. You said we should be clear about what this means. It means not being able to do things, good Labour things, as quickly as we might like. Now, can you tell us what that might mean? Does that mean cutting spending, or does it mean making changes less quickly than you would like if you're lucky enough to win office?
Well, Laura, I'm not going to write our manifesto on your programme. We don't know the extent of the damage, but what I was being clear with my own party and the public is that I know that an incoming Labour government is going to inherit an economic mess from this government, economic damage. And therefore, there are things that we would like to do as an incoming government, good Labour things, as I've described them, we will not be able to do as quickly as we would want.
But like what? You must have
Laura,
things in mind.
We don't know the extent of the damage, and I'm not going to write out our manifesto on your programme. But we have set fiscal rules. We've said we will pay for day-to-day spend, we will only borrow to invest, and we will get debt down as a percentage of our economy.
And I know you're reluctant
we've also
to get
said, I know you won't let me do this, but we have set out the tax changes we would make on the windfall tax, on non-dom status, on the tax break for private schools, and on loopholes for private equity. So we have already begun to set out some of the ways in which we would change those taxations. Very few economists,
Keir Starmer, would believe that those would tot up to meet anything like the black hole that might greet you when you come into office. And you are also auditioning to be Prime Minister like Penny Mordaunt, like Boris Johnson, like Rishi Sunak. Can you tell us, without the specifics, what your priorities would be if people aren't going to be able in the Labour Party to get what they want straight away?
Let me tell you
briefly, what would
my priorities: growing the economy, and the way we would do that is to have a green prosperity plan, which would seize the opportunity. We've got once-in-a-generation opportunity for the next generation of jobs. We've got a clean power plan for 2030 that will double onshore wind, that will triple solar power, that will quadruple offshore wind. That is a plan. It's an ambitious plan that we can do over 6 years. It will grow the economy across the whole of the country. But I want an economy that works for working people. I do not believe in this theory that it's only those at the top that create the wealth. I'm going to try you on one more
specific on an issue that's dear to Labour voters' hearts, it's dear to everybody's hearts. This is a yes-no question. Would you increase spending on the NHS in line with inflation?
Well, we will set out what we'll do with the NHS, but of course the NHS needs more money.
So you're not ready to say that?
It needs more than money. My wife works in the NHS. You've heard this before. My mum worked in the NHS. My sister worked in the NHS. I ran a public service. I know that, of course, they need more money, but I also know that we need reform. The NHS needs to move to a preventative model where we intercept disease.
And that's a big subject all of its own, so I hope you come back to talk about that on another occasion. So, Keir Starmer, thank you so much for coming in this morning. You covered lots of ground there. Thank you. Now, of course, there are, away from the hurly-burly of British politics, more important things going on in the world. You know, on this programme, we are keeping a close eye on what's happening in Ukraine, whereas as well as the ongoing fighting, more than 1.5 million homes are without electricity after a wave of Russian rocket attacks hit power generators across the country. Is that a new tactic to harm ordinary Ukrainians? We've been speaking to Alexei Reznikov, Ukraine's defence minister.
Yes, it's absolutely true. That's a new tactics of the new commander of Russian armed forces. He used the same tactics in Syria, and he shot in Aleppo, and you know his background. He is former prisoner, and this is tactics to fight with the civilians, not with the armed forces of Ukraine. That's why we absolutely comprehended that priority number one, it's air defense systems for Ukraine. That's why I was in Brussels and during the meeting with the Ramstein Format, and after that Ministerium of NATO countries, we discussed with my colleagues, my friends, ministers of defense, different countries, that this is priority number one.
With winter coming and increasing pressure for governments in Europe, particularly because of the rise in energy prices, do you see any evidence there's fatigue in other countries that efforts to support Ukraine might fade?
One of my threats is a fatigue syndrome in Europe, especially, and in different countries and other countries also. But when Kremlin started the new campaign using the drones and calibers and cruise missiles or ballistic missiles against civilian facilities especially, they show to the whole world that it's a really country who sponsors terrorism. It's a really terrorist country. And it's interesting, the reaction of my partners, my colleagues, was absolutely pro-Ukrainian. They told me that no any evidence of fatigue syndrome in their countries. We will stay with Ukraine. We will stay till the end. The end will be your victory.
President Zelensky has recently accused Russia of planting mines at that big dam in the Kherson region of southern Ukraine, which is under Moscow's control. What's the evidence for that? And if it was true and the dam was blown up, what would it mean?
No, it means that this dam could be blown up. And we have evidence from our intelligence services, and we told to our partners that there are these threats. But it's interesting because the consequences of this, probably if they will do this act, the consequences will be also not against the Ukraine armed forces or civilians, because on the left side of the Dnipro River, they have more Russian forces. They have more occupied territories, and the water will flow, especially on the left bank of the river, because it's different heights between right and left hand.
So do you think Russia would do that?
You know, I hope that they will not do it, but they did before a lot of stupid things. And I thought that they have like friends with their mind. So they are crazy.
There are threats too from the Russians of using nuclear weapons. You've said they're crazy, they do stupid things, but is that nuclear threat a credible one?
They did a lot of crazy things, but they staying as pragmatic at the same time. And for them, using nuclear club, it's a last step or last word in the world, because they will open Pandora box, and we will ring the bell, and we will remind to our partners that we have Budapest Memorandum, when United States, United Kingdom, France have the obligation to defend Ukraine.
Ukraine's Defence Minister Alexei Reznikov speaking to me a bit earlier from Kiev. Now, Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson fronted up to each other last night. We don't know if they found a way to come together to stop impending disaster in their party. At this stage, who knows what will happen? But have they got that on their mind rather than coming out for interviews? Well, it seems they have. They've got a busy couple of days ahead, but we can talk now to a well-known backer of each man. Dominic Raab, who was Boris Johnson's Deputy Prime Minister, will be here in the studio in a second. But first of all, we can speak to Jacob Rees-Mogg, Boris Johnson evangelist and the current Business Secretary. He joins us from Somerset. Good morning, Mr. Rees-Mogg. Have you been in touch with Boris Johnson, and is he actually going to stand?
Yes, I have been speaking to Boris Johnson, and clearly he is going to stand. There's a great deal of support for him, as you will have seen.
Does he definitively have the 100 names required to get to the final two? Because during the day yesterday, his campaign claimed he had, but didn't give any more information, didn't release any names, and some people in Rishi Sunak's campaign claimed that suggested they've been making it up.
Well, they would, wouldn't they? The system is that the proposer and seconder's names are made public. Other people have a choice as to whether to make their names public or not, but the people who are doing the numbers for Boris's campaign tell me that they have the numbers, so the 100 that is necessary of members of Parliament are there.
Why then has Steve Baker, your fellow Brexiteer, you were both deeply involved in bringing down Theresa May, why in your view has he said that Boris Johnson this morning would be a disaster? And I quote exactly.
Well, Steve and I don't always agree on everything. You shouldn't expect that we would, that there have been various times over the years when we've come to different political conclusions. So I wouldn't be surprised that not everybody who I've ever worked with on one issue shouldn't agree with me on this issue.
But why do you think members of the public would accept Boris Johnson as Prime Minister again? I mean, if we look at the record, he's been investigated for lying to Parliament. He was found to have broken the law while in office. He had disastrous by-election results. Polling shows that actually the suggestion that he's still an electoral winner is not the case. So why would the country accept him again, in your view?
Well, OK. Because I think a lot of what you've said is actually not getting the full story. So Boris delivered Brexit. He supported Ukraine, and standing up to Russia was the first world leader to do that. And he got us through a pandemic. He won a majority of 80. He won Hartlepool in a by-election. He has been the greatest electoral asset the Conservative Party has had in modern times. And if you look at the poll in the Mail on Sunday today, he's the one who appeals most to people who voted Conservative in 2019.
And we know that there are plenty of other polls that actually show the opposite, and you list some of what many people may agree are his achievements. But after those things had taken place, more than 50 ministers in his government went public to force him from office, essentially saying he was not fit. Now, just because there were achievements previously, didn't his time in office suggest that actually he wasn't up to the job by the end of it?
I think that's such an extraordinary rewriting of history to dismiss those achievements of historic proportions.
I'm not dismissing those achievements, Jacob Rees-Mogg. What I'm saying is is that more than 50 ministers in Boris Johnson's own government resigned to force him from office.
These are fundamental achievements. You know, Ukraine, you had the Ukrainian Defence Minister on. Ukraine's support was dependent upon the leadership Boris Johnson showed. Brexit fundamentally changes our constitution for the better, delivers on the 2016 referendum result, and getting us through the pandemic was something no government had had to deal with. These are quite extraordinary historic achievements. And he took over the Conservative Party, that was 30% behind in the opinion polls in 2019, and within a few months won a majority of 80. That is a quite extraordinary electoral asset.
And no one would deny that historic. And Jacob Rees-Mogg, nobody would deny that historical political achievement. That's absolutely on the record, and it was quite a moment. But the point is, during his time in office, many Conservatives, many of your colleagues, many people who had previously been his significant backers, saw him up close and concluded that he was no longer fit for office. Now, you take an absolutely different view, but my question is, why do you think the country would therefore accept him again as Prime Minister when so many people in your party concluded that he wasn't up to it?
Because his mandate was from the country. I think you're looking at it through the wrong end of the telescope. You were just speaking to Sir Keir Starmer, who was once again demanding a general election. Now, Boris Johnson is the person who won the mandate. The call for a general election is pretty hollow if the person who won the mandate is actually the Prime Minister.
Do you accept that Rishi Sunak was right about the economy in the summer? So when he warned that Liz Truss's plans would lead to financial instability, would lead to more inflation, would lead to questions about the UK's financial stability?
I think there are a whole range of questions about the economy. I've always thought that the increase in national insurance was a mistake, which has been reversed. If you look at the yen, it is at a 32-year low against the dollar. So I think to single this out as a UK phenomenon is actually incorrect.
OK, Jacob Rees-Mogg, we must leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
A fascinating 24-hour, 48 hours ahead. Now, Dominic Raab, as promised, is here, who's supporting Rishi Sunak. Welcome to you.
Good to see you, Laura.
There was a meeting last night between Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson. Do you know what happened? Did they do a deal?
No, I don't think there's any issue around deals here, and that's not the right way to proceed.
So there won't be a deal between the two of them?
Well, look, what would that deal involve? Rishi Sunak is very clear. On the BBC tally you mentioned, he has double the number of MPs supporting him compared to Boris. We've got a whole range as well as the number. Big beasts like Sajid Javid coming out for him, Brexiteers like Steve Baker, Kemi Badenoch, Tom Tugendhat. So I think that tells you the range of his support. But what they did did have was a very good conversation about the need for unity. Iain Duncan Smith's talked about that. And I think you can see from the momentum and the growing number, but also the range of support for Rishi, that he is the best placed, not just because he's got the numbers and it's about that, but also he's got the breadth of support. And I think, look, I'd love to see Boris Johnson come back to frontline politics. I'm speaking personally. But we have this major issue which led to him having to resign, which is Partygate. And in a matter of days, not weeks, a matter of days, he's going to see televised witness testimony, including his own, which is going to take him right back into that spiral of
And
ground.
you've taken a decision not to back him now, but you are backing Rishi Sunak. But why, when members, your own party members, rejected Rishi Sunak in the summer, he lost then? So why can he be a winner now? I mean, your party made a view. They gave a judgment.
Well, look, that was the question then. I think on the fundamental issue facing the economy, I think Rishi was right then, and I think he's right now. Effectively, Jeremy Hunt has introduced the approach that Rishi had advocated, but of course there's much more that needs to be done. Financial stability in the way that Lord King has set out is critical. Getting inflation down, the number one priority. Rishi Sunak is the one talking about it. And secondly, I think the members will look at this, if it goes to the members, and let's see.
Should it?
Well, look, we play by the rules that we've got, but I think what they will be very conscious of is, first of all, who can win in the country, and I think whether it's the YouGov polling or the opinion polling, which is the best place to reach out, and secondly and fundamentally, that level of MP support, which is growing by the hour for Rishi Sunak, because ultimately we do need to come together. I agree with much has been said, and I also would tout the many achievements of Boris Johnson. It's not about...
But there are lots of MPs still to declare. You know that, Sunak's well ahead, but there are lots still to declare. But it was interesting, you mentioned what Lord King was saying there. What he was saying is basically governments have for a long time not fronted up. Now, Rishi Sunak was the Chancellor for a couple of years. He too borrowed enormous amounts of money to support people during the pandemic. I'm not saying if that was the right decision or the wrong decision, but you can't sit there and say that Rishi Sunak's record as Chancellor is somehow unblemished and he doesn't have a part in everything that's happened recently.
No, look, we all take our responsibility, but Rishi Sunak was the Chancellor that saw us through with the Prime Minister that huge challenge, the millions of jobs saved through the furlough scheme, the businesses kept alive, viable, so we didn't have that appalling economic and social scarring that otherwise would have been the case. And he is also the politician who has set out what is clearly the right plan to get financial stability, market confidence, inflation down, interest rates down. We talked about this all over the summer, and get the country moving forward. So whether it's the economic credentials or, and you're right, on the tally that we've seen so far, his ability to garner support from double the number of MPs compared to Boris, I think he's the right person for both economic reasons and political to take us forward.
If he's victorious, would you keep Jeremy Hunt as Chancellor?
What we don't do in the course of a leadership contest, and I think we should be very clear, start handing out jobs.
Well, hang on, Penny Mordaunt did. She said explicitly, for reasons of stability, she would keep Jeremy Hunt as Chancellor.
Look, what he will do, he's been very clear, and you can see it from the level of and the range of support that he's got, is he will put a government of all the talents. But I don't think leadership contests, with great respect to any other candidate, should become a Dutch auction of cabinet posts.
But that's notable. You haven't said that Rishi Sunak would keep Jeremy Hunt as Chancellor.
We've said across the board, actually, any Prime Minister ought to have the prerogative to form the very best team and be able to do that in a clear way.
It's been noticeable this morning, talking to Penny Mordaunt and also talking to Iain Duncan Smith, your former party leader, actually how both of them reflected that basically a lot of the public have got every right to be quite hacked off with what's been going on in the Conservative Party. You're a senior figure. Do you understand? Do you accept, do you feel it yourself, that some of the public, frankly, look at what's been going on and think this has just been a disaster? And why is Rishi Sunak, who's been part of things until very recently, why is he a solution?
Well, first of all, I would think, and I agreed with what Jacob said, that Boris Johnson achieved a great many positive things. We have had the various different challenges which are unprecedented, whether it's COVID, of course Brexit, then the war in the Ukraine, the impact on the cost of living. So these are unprecedented times. But look, I think on the fundamental calls on the economy, it's Rishi that has been right, and I think he showed, for example, with the furlough scheme, why he's got the experience to deliver. But of course, I also see as a member of the Conservative family that there is a political mess, and we all, as members of the Conservative family, have got a duty to fix it.
All right, it doesn't feel like a very happy family right now. Dominic, Raab, let's see what the next couple of days bring. Thank you very much for coming in this morning. Now, As our time comes to a close, it's nearly 10 o'clock after another mad morning in British politics. Let's remind ourselves what Penny Mordaunt, who's vying to be Prime Minister, had to say.
I was the halfway house between Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss, and I deeply regret that the debate now is about, are you for stability or low taxes? That's not the right construct. They're two sides of the same coin.
Well, let's get a last final word from our panel. Mervyn King, how closely do you think the financial markets will be watching what happens here in the next couple of days? Are we still in jeopardy?
Well, no, I don't think we're in jeopardy. I think financial markets reacted quite calmly to what's happened in the last few days. And frankly, they'll be looking just as much, if not more so, at what the Labour Party is saying than the Conservative candidates. All the politicians you've had on the programme today have talked about putting the national interest first and economic stability. Well, that's words. The real question is, what does it take to bring inflation down? How can we save more as a country? And what are we going to do to help our children and grandchildren meet the debt costs that we are leaving to them?
I think you're giving them all a B-, maybe something around that. Jane, briefly from you, whatever happens, from the numbers you see right now, could the Tories hang on at the next general election?
It's not looking likely. They're in a perilous position. They are highly divided, and they're facing an extraordinarily difficult policy picture. So this is a terrible political picture, and it's a very challenging, scenario for them. And the polling doesn't look very positive for them right now. And it would take something really substantial to turn this around, as it has taken something really substantial for it to get this bad.
Something kind of superhuman. But if we've learned anything in the last few years, it is actually that anything could happen in British politics. But Iain Duncan Smith, do you believe this vote must go to the Conservative Party members?
I want my party to settle down. I want my party to recognise that they're staring over the brink of a precipice. They have to make a decision whether they want to step back. I believe in the democracy process, so if there are two candidates, it must go to the electorate. But it may be possible that there aren't, and so we'll deal with that as it comes. But the one key thing that's got to be done by my party is understand you have now got to start telling a story about how difficult things are going to be, what the problems are, and what we will do, and dancing around that isn't going to square it. Otherwise, we may face Canada with a realignment, and that I do not want.
OK, thank you all so much for joining us this morning. Really interesting to hear you. Thank you to our guests, a professor, a sir and a lord. It almost sounds like the beginning of a bad joke, but it was the essence of a great panel. Let's go back to this morning's question. Can any of the candidates get a grip of this competition and the country? Well, we've heard that both Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson will stand, and Penny Mordaunt was here in person to make her case for unity. But we've also heard about those damning polling numbers for the Conservatives, whoever wins. And we've heard from the former Bank of England governor who managed the last economic crisis about the real perils that lie ahead and the need for truths from politicians. And we heard from an ever more confident-sounding Keir Starmer. But he can't force the election he craves, and no politician has an easy answer to what is happening to the economy. So, Keir Starmer and the rest of us watch on again while the Conservative Party decides in the next few days who should lead our country. You can catch up on anything you missed today on iPlayer as ever, and I'll see you this time next week when there will be, stand by, a new Prime Minister. Maybe they'll even be here, who knows. It's not long though till the lectern will be out in Downing Street again, and whoever takes their place there, it will be the 5th entrance to number 10 since 2010. And they face a hell of a job after a hell of a 12 years. Goodbye.
Her Majesty the Queen has asked me to form a new government, and I have accepted. But I do not think it would be right for me to try to be the captain that steers our country to its next destination.
Her Majesty the Queen has asked me to form a new government, and I accepted. I will shortly leave the job that it has been the honour of my life to hold.
The doubters, the doomsters, the gloomsters, they are going to get it wrong again. My friends, in politics, no one is remotely indispensable.
I have a bold plan to grow the economy through tax cuts and reform. I will remain as Prime Minister until a successor has been chosen. Thank you.